Scotch is an adjective meaning of Scotland. The modern usage in Scotland is Scottish or Scots, and the word Scotch is only applied to specific products, mostly food or drink, such as Scotch whisky, Scotch pie, Scotch broth, and Scotch eggs. Scotch applied to people is widely considered pejorative in Scotland, reflecting old Anglo-Scottish antagonisms, but it is still occasionally used in England, though the usage is considered old-fashioned, an island, and is in common use in North America. The verb to scotch is unrelated to the adjective. It derives from Anglo-French escocher meaning to notch, nick, from coche, a notch, groove, extended in English to mean to put an abrupt end to, with the forms scotched, scotching, scotches. For example, the Prime Minister scotched the rumours of her illness by making a public appearance. Also, in the traditional children's game of hopscotch, known as peevers in Scotland, it refers to the lines one hops over. Decline in usage. The adjective or noun Scotch is an early modern English contraction of the English word Scottish, which was later adopted into the Scots language. It more or less replaced Scottish as the prevailing term in England in the 17th century. The English playwright William Shakespeare used the word Scotch to describe a jig, but always employed the term Scottish when people were the subject. Scots predominated in Scotland until the 18th century, when Anglicisation became fashionable and Scotch came to be used in both England and Scotland. A 1788 letter by Robert Burns says in part, apropos, is not the Scotch phrase auld lang syne exceedingly expressive? There is an old song and tune which has often thrilled through my soul. You know I am an enthusiast in old Scotch songs. Burns wrote of himself in 1787, the appellation of a Scotch bard, is by far my highest pride. To continue to deserve it is my most exalted ambition. Thus also Byron, English Bards and Scotch Reviewers Ref. 1809. From the early 19th century, however, Scots or Scottish increasingly became the preferred usages among educated Scottish people, Scotch being regarded as an anglicised affectation. By 1908, this was described by the New York Times as a long-established Euro preference in modern usage in Scotland. Scotch is rarely used, other than as described in the following paragraph for certain articles. It has gathered patronising and faintly offensive connotations, and a non-Scot who uses the word in conversation with Scots as a description of them may find this a good test of their courtesy. The use of Scots and Scottish is not altogether consistent. But in most words and phrases referring to Scotland's people one or the other is normally used, there is a certain tendency for Scottish to be used in more formal contexts. In modern current British usage, in England as in Scotland, the general term for things from or pertaining to Scotland is Scottish. Scots is used for the Scots language and Scots law, although one increasingly hears it used of people and organisations, especially in newspaper articles. Scotch remains in use in only a few specific cases. Scotch Terrier was once one of these legacy uses, but has increasingly been replaced with Scottish Terrier. Scotland was one of the first countries in the world to introduce compulsory education for all children in 1696, administered in each parish by the Kirk. When the British government eventually chose to centralise and regulate the system in 1872, the Scottish school system was initially placed under a Scotch education department with offices in London. In 1918, as a result of objections from within Scotland, the department was moved to Edinburgh and renamed the Scottish Education Department. This reflects the linguistic preferences of modern Scotland. John Kenneth Galbraith, in his book The Scotch, written during his time as President John F. Kennedy's American ambassador to India, documents how the descendants of 19th-century pioneers from Scotland who settled in southwestern Ontario affectionately referred to themselves as Scotch. He states the book was meant to give a true picture of life in the Scotch-Canadian community in the early decades of the 20th century. Galbraith's use of the term Scotch is revealing in demonstrating the usage of a Canadian speaking about his own community. And certainly his use of the term is not pejorative. This is an example of how older uses of words and forms continue in communities of expatriates broken off from their original roots, in this case in the 18th century when Scotch was the prevailing term. Similarly, the Scots who settled in Ulster, many of whom later emigrated, are known non-pejoratively in North America as the Scotch-Irish. It was the native Scots who rejected the usage of Scotch, which had been adopted from England after the 1707 Act of Union. Tommy Douglas, no Southern Ontarian but from Scotland, arriving in the Canadian province of Manitoba at age 14 in 1918 and in an online vote conducted by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in 2004 was voted the greatest Canadian. Referred to himself as Scotch. In 1965, the historian A.J.P. Taylor wrote in his preface to English History 1914–1945, "Some inhabitants of Scotland now call themselves Scots and their affairs Scottish. They are entitled to do so. The English word for both is Scotch, just as we call Lafrena Section A's the French and Deutschland Germany. Being English, I use it." That the use of Scots is the modern preferred use in all levels of society in Scotland is not in doubt, but occasional use of Scotch in varieties of the Scots language continues with terms such as Scotch and English, Scotch fiddle, Scotch mile and many other examples republished by Waverley Books 2000. There are other good indicators that the use of Scotch has been whitewashed out, and become a shibboleth. Early versions of dictionaries produced in Burns' wake in the 19th century had titles such as A Dictionary of the Scotch Dialect of the Lowlands, and modern place names now written as Scots, for example, Scottstarvet and Scotscalder existed in previous incarnations as Scotch. Scotch Corner survives as a place name in England. In a reminiscence on his early training as an advocate in Edinburgh, Sir Walter Scott describes the law as Scotch law some 4 times and as Scots law just once. By the 1840s other writers are using Scots law, and this usage is now standard worldwide. Scots law reports in the 19th century show frequent judicial usage of Scotch as referring to people. By the turn of that century, and since, practically no examples can be discovered. In 1978, the song Scotch Machine by the pan-European group Voyage was released in the UK as Scots Machine. In the 1937 film Storm in a Teacup, the Scottish-Scotch debate is a running joke. In one scene, Vicky is mixing cocktails. She explains to Frank that her father Provost Gow, who is standing for Parliament as a member of the Caledonia League, wants to be Prime Minister of the first Scotch Parliament. Scottish, Vicky, Scottish. Her father pompously corrects her. "Well then, fix yourself a Scottish and soda." She replies, and flounces out the door. In another scene one of Gow's Caledonia League minions says to him, "I've never seen the like in 30 years of Scotch politics." With the same stern rebuke from the Provost. In the chorus of his song I Love a Lassie, music hall comedian and singer Sir Harry Lauder sings I Love a Lassie, a bonny Highland lassie, Mary Ma Scotch Bluebell. See also, Scotch, Scotch whisky, Scotch college, Scotch Irish American, Scots language, Scottish English, Ulster Scots Agency. References